Right.
I guess that's saying the same thing.
Well, whenever conditions arise in your consciousness, leave them freely. Leaving them freely means you don't push or pull on it. Don't try to change it. Don't try to make it one way. Don't try to make it stop being some way. However it is that way, and that's that. Absolutely, that's that, like in the strongest possible sense. And then it's like the sun shining in the sky. It just is. This radiance just is. In exactly as it is, here, now, with this. Doesn't need to be pushed or pulled or made into something or tried to get from somewhere to something. Clear?
Mm-hmm. Nice. Find a harder one.
Well, it's not about stumping me. It's about try to find one that seems to be meaningful, but you're not quite clear on what it means. It seems murky to you.
Right. I mean, I had a couple, but now I didn't bookmark.
No, that's okay. We have a few hours here. You can
Yeah.
take your time. Come through it.
That's like, we would like a bad tune that spontaneously arises.
Sure, it's not about good or bad.
And rises.
It's very simple. This is radiant presence. Very simple.
Wow.
It already is. It completely is. So, yeah, so what? So nothing. This is it. This is radiant presence. It could be easier.
I find there's a tendency to not want to have to.
But why do you have to do? Everything happens by itself. See, everything happens in the instant, so it's already happened. See, I'm moving my hand. It's already moving. I don't need to move it. Because right now, it's already moving. Now it's not moving, but it is moving. So what's the doing? It's already happening in the instant. It already is what it is in the instant. Doing implies sort of an intent and a this and a that and some degree of time, and it's all just in the instant. The instant is already complete. It's already happened, and that's always the case. So everything that is right now is exactly as it is. It's already done. It's completely done. So nothing needs to be done. And if there seems to be what you could call any doing happening, it's already done. It's already happening.
Speaking of things that need to be done, do we need to turn on the camera?
The camera's on.
Oh.
The recorder's not on.
Oh.
The mechanism that seems to be thinking, and it's thinking, or it seems to like feel like it's controlling the doing or doing the doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in itself like just being done?
Of course, if it's happening, it's happening.
even the feeling like there's an overlay of something doing it, that I'm doing it.
But if it feels like there's an overlay, that feeling is already happening. So where's the doing? You can't find any doing. You can't fit doing into the instinct. Because the instinct has already happened.
Even if it feels that way, but you're saying even like that feeling is doing that. Like what's doing that feeling?
But what's doing anything? Where does anything come from? You know, like the verse said, it's like the sun shining in the sky.
Hey Peter, what's the point of Tibetan dream yoga?
The point of Tibetan dream yoga is to awaken consciously within your dreams. And ultimately to discover that dreams are the same thing that the waking world is. And vice versa. And the waking world and the dream world are both just radiant presence.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting you should ask that. I just had an email discussion with a guy a couple of days ago about that topic.
Because I was I was thinking of trying to do something with my dreams, like or like well, one can sort of when one is going to sleep, one can sort of program
Sure.
oneself.
Sure, there's lots of techniques involved in that.
Uh-huh. Because it's like there's not every night, but it seems like I'll go to bed and I'll feel whatever relaxed or have energy or whatever, and then it's like there's this layer that comes up,
Uh-huh.
and then like in the morning I'll be tired, or it's so almost like I feel like I have to sort of let go of that energy that was
Uh-huh.
that came up
Uh-huh.
to some extent, right? So maybe that's still just like a question of navigating, but like one can do a sort of dream yoga if I'm awake in my dreams or aware in my dreams.
Well, dream yoga is techniques that enable you to be awake in your dream.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
And then there's whatever, just this sort of noticing process that.
Well, there's various techniques. It's not really my area.
Uh-huh.
I'm not particularly interested in dream yoga myself because what's important is what this is. And when you see what this is, everything is that, dream or not. Lucid dream or being lost in the dream is what this is. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. But like what one can do noticing with any sort of any seeming entity and like right now.
Yeah.
One can do the same thing in a dream if one is reasonably awake, or even like yeah, John was saying one time like the yoga is most productive for him when he's going to sleep. Like, is that, no?
I have no recollection of saying that.
Okay.
Doesn't it go with his leg around his neck?
It's probably because he smokes pot before he's going to sleep. That's just idle speculation.
Speaking of, where's the CBD pen?
That was gone the first night.
I'll hold this plate for CBS pharmacy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The cartridge has been flipped. That's hilarious.
Oh.
All right, I have something from the introduction. It's kind of a longer one, but this was something that I came across, and I'm like, wait, this is kind of because you usually recommend the introduction, right?
In this book, the introduction is excellent.
Yeah, so it says, over the years, Yangzen Rinpoche has persistently explained that the students must realize the difference between Dzogchen and Dzogchen Pa in order not to fall into the mistaken view of nihilism. The belief that since Dzogchen is the supreme source, a Dzogchen practitioner doesn't need to engage in virtuous actions and so on, and can even manifest all sorts of erratic or negative conduct. Anything goes. This sort of view has nothing to do with the real Dzogchen. Dzogchen Pa is not Dzogchen. Dzogchen Pa is the practitioner who tries to purify his or her obscurations by following Dzogchen methods. Hence, at all times, one must be aware of one's level of realization. Many of us have read or heard stories of realized Dzogchen yogis or Mahasiddhas who behaved very strangely and often seemingly incongruently, going beyond the social norms of acceptable. Some may try to emulate this kind of behavior or so-called crazy wisdom without realizing that the underlying base behind it is the complete realization of the natural state, the ability to remain in it at all times of day and night while engaging in any kind of activity of body, speech, and mind. Until this capacity is reached, merely emulating the external facets of crazy wisdom conduct without realizing the inner background is extremely negative and will lead to the accumulation of a vast store of negative karma rather than its purification. The Dzogchen Pa then must soberly know his or her own capacity. If one is unable to remain in the natural state at all times, then one must perform virtuous actions, accumulate merits.
Right. Okay. Let me
Okay.
translate. The way I would describe what's traditionally called, virtuous actions and accumulate merit, and all that means do yoga, means noticing. But the Dzogchen Pa means the person who practices yoga, and Dzogchen is the great perfection. They're one and the same, but the Dzogchen Pa doesn't know they're one and the same until he realizes that they're one and the same. So what this is talking about is if you learn Dzogchen, oh, this is great perfection, everything's radiant presence, and you just behave like an asshole, without really knowing for yourself that you are radiant presence, this is radiant presence, but just because it's all radiant presence, so I have permission to do whatever. Sure, everyone has permission to do anything. People can do whatever they can do, of course. That's neither here nor there. But, acting as if you understand when you don't actually understand for yourself will not do you any good. So that this is radiant presence, that this is Dzogchen, the great perfection, is true. But that truth won't do you any good until you know it for yourself. And the only way to know it for yourself is to do yoga, which is what they would translate by the technical terms of virtuous actions and accumulate wisdom and so on, accumulate merit and so on and so forth.
So a couple of things. One thing that arises for me is, how do you know for sure that you've arrived at the understanding? And like, let's say I do something like I act like a dick, right? And just because I've had some kind of like intuition about what you're talking about, that still means that I'm making the classic mistake that he's talking about, which is using some philosophical understanding of the ultimate sort of realization to justify being a dick.
Right.
So how do I know that I've come? Like, is it one of those like, when the doula meets with her, she's like, you'll know when you're in active labor kind of thing?
Well, it is, in a way, it is. If you have any question whether or not you have arrived, you haven't arrived.
Okay.
For one thing. For another thing, you can consult with someone who is realized, and they can see where you are and advise you.
The other thing was about this virtuous action. I mean, the way he makes it sound is like there is something to this thing about karma and accumulating negative
Well, that's-
karma.
That's traditional Buddhism, which I don't particularly subscribe to. But in other words, if you act in a certain way, as if things are a certain way, without understanding for yourself that they are, you're just screwing yourself up by investing yourself in more and more in identification. Karma just means identifying, investment in identifying that things are a certain way.
Okay, so it's not like, oh, based on what he said, it seems like I need to go out and do more good things, whatever.
Well,
it may
but
be.
this is you have this you can there's probably millions of Buddhists who will be glad to fill you in on what they mean by that. I don't like that way of putting it because that's just another way of getting invested in things are a certain way.
Right, like if I start volunteering at orphanages and all of this stuff.
I mean, all that, it's fine to volunteer at orphanages, but if you volunteer in orphanages because you think you're supposed to do it, but you think it's a good thing, you're just identifying with something that you think you're holding to be a certain way rather than seeing what it actually is.
So this term virtuous action is very
ambiguous. It's not ambiguous at all, but you're getting into the philosophy of Buddhism, especially of current Buddhism, which is it's a lifelong study. You want to know what those technical terms mean. Study Tibetan Buddhism for a few years, and you know exactly what they think. They'll tell you exactly what they mean. I think that that's not efficient. I think that the efficient way to go is to simply see what everything is. See that everything is ready and present.
If somebody were to ask you the definition of virtuous action, you would say, would it be appropriate to say anything that you can do to disidentify from what you think is happening around you?
Not disidentify.
Or not identify proactively.
Not identify. Don't identify with it as not being what it is. Maybe that's what you mean by misidentify. So maybe misidentify.
Well, I was just relating back to what you said earlier. Is like even if you try to do good things, then you can become identified in a different way.
If you think there are things to do, and you think there's a you to do them, then you're already misidentifying. You're holding things to be a way that they aren't. So yeah, virtue also. So look and see what anything is, and when you know what it is, then that's all you need to do.
Easier said than done.
Perhaps.
So the
But it's doable.
highest act of virtue would be to investigate what this is, rather than.
Well, it depends what you mean by virtue. Virtue is an ambiguous word. Virtue isn't a holy word that's set in stone with its meaning, defined from the beginning by the Almighty. It's a word that people made up. The word virtue really originally means manhood. The Latin root, what's it?
Virtue?
Yeah, it means manhood. It means maleness. It means, So, somehow that got smeared into all of these other sloppy implications of being good or being meek or being compassionate or whatever. And there may be, it's murky. The whole science of the whole, study of meaning, semantics, is all very, very murky because it's all based on the idea that things are a certain way. And since there's only radiant presence here,
So to avoid.
it says virtue is radiant presence, and vice is radiant presence, and radiant presence is radiant presence, then what's the difference between virtue and vice? But if you don't know
Right. That's
that
right.
virtue is radiant presence and that vice is radiant presence, then you're liable to be getting yourself into trouble by behaving like a jerk.
Right, but if I took that at face value and said, well, vice is radiant presence, so I get
Right.
then I'm doing exactly what he's saying.
Isn't that what I'm? Yeah, exactly. That's what we're talking about.
Right. So then,
So the point is to
what should I do?
practice yoga.
What was that?
Practice yoga. Be a Zochenpa.
Follow your intuition and your inclination. It does itself anyway.
Well, you're going to do that anyway.
Yeah.
But what should you do in terms of advice or philosophy in terms of that general scenario?
So you practice it until you see no difference between.
Practice it until you see what it is. Then you'll discover for yourself whether or not there's a difference. There's not two things to have a difference between.
I run by what I do.
Of course.
I remember, I try to remember, what this is the miraculousness of this being at all. Like really of just that this is. And
Yeah. Right.
that works for me. Second,
Well, it only needs to work. It only needs to work in the instant, which is only the instant. So then it's eternal.
it's all the time.
Yeah.
And somehow there's this belief going on underneath that if I do this enough, it becomes more the pattern, or that if it happens, it surfaces more frequently. Or
Well, that's a hypothesis, and you can try and verify it by seeing if it's true.
well, there's still there's a doing. There's a
The doing is in the that this is. The doing is in the miraculous presence of this. That's the only doing. Seeing that is that merely means not denying that. It doesn't mean see, okay, here's radiant presence. Bang. Right here, right now. Okay. Now you don't need to see it, you're already seeing it. You don't need to recognize it, you're already recognizing it. Just don't add on to it a bunch of narration and story that doesn't apply. So it's not that you need to see it, just don't deny it.
oh, well, see, I think I need to see it more often.
But you see it, you always see it. You never see anything but it.
I'm not recognizing it.
But
I have to recognize it.
But not recognizing it really means you're holding it to be something more than it is or other than it is. So you're adding, in other words, it's not that you're failing to recognize, it's not that it's it and you're not getting to it. It's you're totally with it, you're just adding on more. Like whatever it seems to be when you're not recognizing it. Yeah, belief. You're holding it to be a certain way. If you weren't holding it to be a certain way, what is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So the only way it can seem to not be this or not be recognized is it's not that you're not recognizing it, it's that you're recognizing more than it by recognizing some story or interpretation that you're piggybacking onto this presence and holding that to be true, either as well or instead of the simple fact of presence, the comprehensive, complete presence of conditions in the instant, which is always a given, always a done deal.
I guess there's subtly that which sees this. It isn't like an animal.
Well, its presence is the seeing of it. There is nothing to see. There is nothing to see it, and there's no it to be seen or not seen. Its presence is the seeing. Seeing is not a very good. I mean, language always screws us up. Seeing is not a very good way to put it, because seeing implies something to see and someone to see it. It's not like that. It's just simply presence. Presence is the best word. Presence is just, it's present. It doesn't imply any mechanism. It doesn't imply any structure. Presence is just the fact, the sole fact. And it's a radiant presence in the sense that this presence has all this infinity of qualitativeness that it presents as. All the colors and sounds and whatever. But it's not seen or not seen, and it's not seen by anything or not seen, so on and so forth. There's no structure like that. It's just presence. Bang. Presence. Presence. Presence is the noun, presence is the verb. Presence is presencing. Presence is ising. And you can't go beyond that. You can't add to that, you can't take away from it. It has no structure. It's, as you say, miraculous. It's the given. Isness is. And that's the whole story. But if you try to add story onto that, that's the only way you can seem to be not recognizing it. So recognize is not maybe a very clear way to put it.
I think it's important to remember that that is all there is.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing else.
Yeah, there's nothing else.
So when you start looking at something else, you're distracting yourself from it.
Yeah, you have to imagine that there is something else, which in the imagining of that is of course this. It starts getting very complicated when you start trying to figure out what it is. But just in the fact, bang. Yes. It's simplest, it's simpler than simple. And it's full and complete, it's everything.
A friend of mine is practicing Ramina's question,
Uh-huh.
who am I? And she's following the thought back and arriving at nothing, and then she tries again and continues to find nothing. And she said it's getting really frustrating and she doesn't really get it and it just gives her a headache. You talk about practices a little bit.
Sure. I never recommend the practice Who Am I? Mainly because it implies a sort of a psychologized or perceptual, or it implies that there's a who, there's an I, and if there's an I, then there's a this, and I mean it implies all of these sort of complexities. If I was going to have a question that was a question in like Who Am I, as Ramana proposed, I would say, what is this, or what is? because it doesn't have an implicit structure in it. You know, as soon as we say I, then, you know, I'm thinking, like, all of that comes with the assumptions of, oh, I am, and I'm Peter Brown, and I'm this body, and I live in this world. I mean, all of that is sort of subliminally included in that, because we're parsing it in terms of, you know, I is such a loaded concept, and all our lives we've been kind of programmed to use it within a certain sort of a structural implication. Whereas, what is this? To me, you know, this is objective, but it doesn't exclude the subjective. You know, this is neither physical nor non-physical. This has a minimal of implication in terms of, you know, implied structures and so on. And in terms of practices like this, when you find nothing, that is what, then you've succeeded. Because there is nothing to find, because nothing is resolvable. Although, when you know, like I say, because of all the complex implications of who am I, that's liable to you know, already be murky, too murky for that to be very useful. In my opinion. Whereas, what is this? Well, this is, but what is it? I look, I can't find, I can't pin down what it is. That it is self-evident, self-verifying. But what it is, what is it? How is it what it is? It's unanswerable. And in that unanswerability, one has discovered a lot about it. And in not being able to find anything, one discovers that one can't find anything whatsoever. So if I can't tell what this is, then I can't tell what this is, or what this is, or what this is, you know. And so that's very interesting. Where does that leave you?
Peter, why do you say you can't find what it is? Because isn't it always findable as yourself or your experience? I mean, like,
Well, you can call it your experience, you can call it yourself, but what do you mean by that?
It's just like the self-evident sort of one substance. Like, it's just.
But is it a substance? Can you find a substance? Is it one? Can you find one? Well, no, exactly. You call it these things, but do you actually find that?
It seems to me it's immediately feelable. It's like the texture is immediately.
The texture is immediately feelable, but if you look closely at the texture, exactly what is the texture? You can't actually resolve it. You can't pin it down. It doesn't. You don't actually find it. It's self-evident that it seems to be the way it seems to be, but when you look very closely, it disappears. In effect, because it's because of its subtlety and unresolvability.
Don't you always find it as a finding, or
No, I never find it as a finding. There's nothing to find. That's what I mean by unresolvable. In Buddhism, they call it emptiness.
I did that for a week once when we were in the jungle, some kind of Osho practice. It was who is in. And it's like you find, but then you keep finding, keep finding. It seemed like there's nowhere to stop at finding something. It was a really cool exercise. But yeah.
It doesn't resolve. It doesn't stabilize to some final thing, some final end. It's like, you know, it's like jumping off a cliff, and you don't, a bottomless cliff, you don't ever hit the bottom. So the inquiry is like that. The inquiry is like free fall. And you know, the implication, if I'm asking the question, if there was an answer, that would be like hitting the bottom. But in fact, there is no answer. You never hit the bottom. And yet, you're continually falling. So there's, you know, as much information as you want, as much implication as you want. But it never ends, it never resolves, it never gets to some final resolution where, oh, now I know it's this and I found it. it doesn't happen. You don't actually find anything.
Can you explain though? Like there's self-recognition, right?
Huh?
There's self-evident self-recognition.
Well, there's those ideas, but when you say self-recognition, what does that actually look like? What does that actually mean?
Well, but perceiving as a knowing, for instance.
Perceiving is a knowing. Okay, but what is a knowing? Can you find a knowing? Can you find what knowing is?
It just seems immediately self-evident.
It does seem self-evident, but can you find it? Can you find what it is?
Well, why does it need to be like?
It doesn't need to be.
Sounds like what you're suggesting can't be done is kind of obvious. Like you can't sort of articulate it as some sort of entity or something like that, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
you can't not only not articulate it as some kind of entity, you can't find it as some sort of entity.
well, okay. So like what you're saying is like the so there's a sense of energetic texture, but like you can't pin down. Well,
yeah, exactly. There's a sense of what it seems to be, and it's self-evident that it is, and that it seems to be that way. But when you go looking into what it seems to be to try to refine what that seems to be, it doesn't converge into wholeness. It doesn't converge into stability, into some answer or some resolution of, oh, now I found what it is. On the contrary, it diverges. The closer you look, the more it opens up into divergent qualities and implications, and you chase any of those and they open up into divergence. So it doesn't ever, you don't ever get anywhere. Or you say you get everywhere, but you don't ever get to any single thing.
But
if you don't look closely, then it's easy to think things are a simple way.
Oh, okay.
But when you look closely, then you discover that, in fact, that the single way they seem to be doesn't stand up to sensitive, close scrutiny.
So what is a binary self-realization?
Huh?
What is a binary self-realization?
It's a euphemism for realizing being.
And what is that?
Well, you can't say. But here it is.
Yeah. Well,
The only problem is when you think you can't say. You can't say it's not a problem. But when you think you can say, then I would say, well, look more closely. Is it really that?
Sometimes it's seen. Like this morning I woke up and it's really intense, like after we had an LCC session with somebody, went to meditation, did some work with somebody, and like terror shit about that. And I completely disappeared. I let myself meditate more. And we did some stuff and we were busy all night. And I really couldn't move on the couch until it was bedtime. And I woke up and I felt kind of like the ocean. I just felt like there was no center. There was no I. It was a very beautiful intimacy, Pat, because it was like, I loved him, but what loved him wasn't me.
Sure.
But that's seemed like wow, this is like a taste of something different, and
sure. But you can't say what it is. You can say what it's not. You can say there's no center. You can say there's no you. But you can't say there's no center. There's no me. But there was a. You can't say that. I mean, you can say it, but there isn't really that either. It's not nothing, but it's not anything in particular.
But I mean, is that like a taste of realization, or does it just come and go, or is that?
It's always like that. Realization doesn't come and go, and the flavor of realization doesn't come and go. The only thing that can come and go is you being distracted away from noticing what it actually is into believing interpretations of what you think it is that are not it, that are oversimplifications.
But I can't imagine I would be like that all the time, in that particular kind of space all the time without that, quote unquote, without saying it.
Well, you don't need to be in that space all the time. You just notice that there is no center, and when there feels like a center, that also is no center. Because feeling like a center, and when you associate the center that it feels like, isn't actually that. It's not actually a center. Feeling like a personality, when you associate the personality, it's not actually that. So in other words, it's not a matter of negating or erasing anything. It's just seeing that whatever it seems to be, which includes everything that the way you usually feel. You know, here I am, Peter Brown, and I'm getting up out of bed and I do my stuff in the morning. All that stuff is fine. But every single bit of that is I don't know. It's explicitly I don't know. Without needing to not be Peter Brown getting up out of bed in the morning doing his stuff.
But to get that intellectually is different from...
Yes, yes. And that's what we were talking about earlier with the, you know, with the Dzogchen part and all that stuff. You know, like you said, you got it non-intellectually, the other morning or this morning when it was, you felt it. It was like, yeah, there's no I, there's no center, there's just this intimacy. Yeah. And that's always the case. And when it seems to be not the case, it's still the case. You're just being distracted by holding it to be one way or another, that if you look closely, wouldn't stand up to scrutiny, and you'd find that it wasn't that either, any more than it was an eye or a center.
Is there any point in trying to see that? I mean, from that space, it seemed like, wow, anything I've ever done or tried has absolutely no validity at all.
Right.
It just does this thing without...
Right.
And then the grasping part of me wants to, you know...
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Reel it in.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly what happens. Ask her whether there's any point in trying to be with it in any particular way. And fundamentally, no. But on the other hand, don't let the fact that, you know, there's no point in trying to be with it in any particular way stop you from trying to be with it in any particular way. Because you're seeing what it is may look like you're trying to see it in a certain way. Or not. I mean, you're seeing what it is this morning. How did it happen? What led up to it? Well, you could look at the steps of what seemed to happen before that led up to that.
I slept.
Yeah. But I mean, the other stuff before it, you know, in the sense that we're thinking about meditation and thinking about, you know, of the fearfulness of losing everything and whatever, and all these kinds of stuff. You know, evidently that was, you know, to the extent there was any kind of causality, that was a sufficient preparation for you to find yourself ending up in this sort of a perspective. And the question is, so what can you do to end up in that sort of perspective? Yeah, well, who knows? But just because you don't know, there's no reason not to try shit.
Yeah. I mean, the big thing for me was like, I allowed myself to let go of the fear of disappearing, which is scary as all shit.
Yeah, but the fear of disappearing is a fantasy. The fear of disappearing is a story. Isn't really fear of actually disappearing. It's fear of what you think disappearing would be, which is a story you're telling yourself. It's a picture. It's an image. It's a narrative you're holding in your mind. You know, disappearing would I'd disappear and I would lose everything. I don't know, whatever. You know, whatever it looks like for you, and then you're afraid of that. You're not afraid of what disappearing. But you did this morning. You disappeared. Yeah. Was it fearful? Was it frightening?
No, it was nice.
Yeah, it was nice.
There's a tiny fear about what that was think, but other than that.
So, see, the fear isn't of that, the fear is of the story. And again, the only thing that keeps us from recognizing, from being in this just, you know, undescribable, concretized intimacy is orienting to narratives, orienting to ways we're telling ourselves that it is. And then emotional reactivity to those things, you know, wanting it or being afraid of it and all this kind of stuff. So all of that engagement is all just with fantasy. But this is right, always right here. The fantasy's going on, but this is always right here, and there's no you, and there's no center. There's it's just this intimacy always.
It's just so interesting because today I finally understood something about the visual field, which is I was always frustrated because I always felt like there was a separate scene and there was a limitation to the visual field. And then somehow I realized, oh, this is all that's seen. I mean, the seeing is not that. Just this is the limitation of this visual field is just being the oval that you see.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything exists outside of my visual field.
Yeah.
And I was okay. That's kind of interesting.
It is, isn't it? It's very interesting.
I mean, I may know it exists on some other. I mean, I can. The field of hearing, I get to acknowledge some other kind of existence, but it's not. It's weird. It's like
it's
the
weird.
bathroom is a really great place to practice this because it's not that it's a limit.
Bathroom's good for yoga.
Yeah.
I find that myself.
Water, anyway, showers,
yeah, what was it?
dishwashing too.
Yeah, dishwashing. Yeah, no, that's all excellent. That's all excellent yoga. Very good.
Is it useful to categorize it as knowing, like maybe not awareness, but the knowing of
it's useful to not worry about categorizing it as anything or not categorizing it as anything. It is what it is. That's what's important, not how you categorize it. You don't get brownie points for coming up with artistic and skillful categories. But here it is. Here's the intimacy. This is right here, right now, with absolutely no distance. It's not away. It's not over there somewhere. Could not be closer. Could not be more intimate. And there's nothing but this right here, right now. That's all. It's a whole shooting match right there. And then describing it or looking at it or this or that or the other, it's like, why bother? That's what those verses in that book are about. I mean, that first verse you asked me about says pretty much exactly that. I mean, in slightly more elaborated form. Here it is. It already is just as it is. Leave it as it is.
The point seems to be just taking you to a quiet place inside of yourself.
But it's not necessarily quiet in the sense of excluding noise. It's just this. Just the presence of what is, just as it is. What already is. Isness already is. It's already a done deal. It's already complete. The instant is completely full, always.
Peter, when you say that which is always seems to deviate from itself, the irresolvability. But another way to say that, and I guess it would be wrong because there's a sort of implication of a time dimension, is that things always seem to keep on changing.
Sure, you can say that.
Yeah.
But again, if you're looking for change, you don't find actual change. But as long as you put seem in there, it's fine. And when you say this always diverges from itself, it diverges from itself in terms of what it seems to be. It always is precisely and fully what itself in the instant.
Yeah, I was just thinking about objects we're noticing.
Yeah.
Because like you've talked like mostly about just visual objects, so I was just like while you're talking, I was like noticing the color of one of like some spot on the floor, or I was also sort of noticing the birds and the sounds, and then I was also kind of wondering about these sort of yogic pictures. Those are yantras. Yeah. So I was thinking about all of those, and then I was just like, I was kind of trying to play with them all, sort of noticing wise, and like for me it seemed more difficult to sort of notice with the birds, you know, because I guess I'm like it just seems like easier if I'm just looking at something that is sort of flat and static and or seems static like a color. I mean, like it's just like it's easier to deal with. And you're talking to Mahesh about, or Mahesh was talking about water, right? And so could you talk a little bit about those different sorts of objects, or like you just notice with any of them?
You noticing consists of being with the presence of experience. Let's say an experience, if you like, but just being with the presence of experience, exactly as it is. And as it is, first of all, it definitely is. So right away, you're with isness. Second of all, that's presence. Second of all, it will seem to have qualities. That's radiance. Third of all, if you try to pin down what any of the qualities are, you'll discover that you can't. You'll discover you discover that there's an incredible richness, but exactly what the richness is can't be defined, can't be determined, can't be settled on. So like to say the birds, you know, you hear this, the presence of that, this incredible intimacy is here now. So that's apparent. And there's qualities of sound, dynamism, pitch, whatever, you know, to describe them. But if you're with those qualities, exactly what do they mean? What is pitch? You know, what are these things? And it's mystery. It's absolute mystery. It is what it is clearly and very precisely, but you can't say what that is. You can't make it a simple thing, and you can't pull it into coherence.
Can't even make the question coherent.
Yeah, or my bumblings around trying to describe it coherent.
Which means that there is no question.
Yeah. Well, there's no question and no answer. That's the bottom line. There's just the fact. You know, and noticing is that. Noticing is noticing the fact. Fact.
The second line is gives you the clarity line.
Yeah. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, so you don't have to. Noticing, I sometimes think that word has a funny overtone, or can have.
Yeah, it's a terrible word.
Well,
Never should have used it.
Well, because it seems to indicate like looking or doing something.
Yeah.
When it seems a lot more like it just appears, you know, and appears without, you know, how does it say it? Do you have that little line?
I don't have it pulled up, but I can find it. Don't worry, I'm reading.
It appears without being mentally definable.
Yes, that's right.
No.
Even as the mind will try and define it, if you look at every definition that mind comes up with, you'll notice that it's an oversimplification but you can't really pin down exactly what you mean by that.
But even that right there can be, you can be with that lightly or freely.
Right.
You know, even that process of seeming to identify or, you know, what is that sound? Like, what is it? The other sound, like, all of that can be just like flowing through. In fact, all of this about that things aren't the way they seem. There is no seem in the first place.
Right.
Seem. So it's really like a flow. It's really, or something more like that in the sense
Well,
that
seeing that there is no seem to seem is what I call noticing. Yeah.
yeah, but there's no, the whole question of, I was thinking about questions in it, and this occurred to me, my God, you know, they're impossible.
Yeah.
They're completely meaningless.
Yeah, questions are impossible, answers are impossible.
Yeah. It's,
You still want
yeah,
to-
yeah.
Whenever spontaneous appearances arise within your consciousness, leave them freely, and then your condition will be like the sun shining in the sky. Don't do anything. This nature is clear, salwa, and aware by itself.
I still have a question now. So what about like okay, so this is a different sort of object for noticing. So like I was doing some eye gazing with Ramana Maharshi's picture, right? So and like sort of like you said before, like a teacher like voice is noticing on the student, right? So it's like I'm looking at Maharshi's picture, and I'm sort of like trying to tune into whatever frequency he's tuning into, more or less, right? Or I'm just trying to like get some sort of sense from the picture, right?
Right.
Like finding within my own experience whatever he seems to be tuned into. So that's
You wanted to pick up what he's putting down, is what you're saying.
yes. So what about that for like a noticing object or a noticing practice?
Well, it's fine, but you know, trying is not necessary. Just be with it and let it, like the verse says, be with it and let it be what it is. It already is what it is, the way that it is. There's no question of seeing it or not seeing it.
Okay, well, I think I get that. Is there would you talk about that in terms of participation or play?
Well,
Not
it is
trying.
participation and it is play in the sense that it's not constrained in any way.
So when you stare at something,
Yeah,
and you know, it does the little acid trip thing.
yeah.
Is there a way to experience? Is there a way to experience that same type of phenomenon with sound or touch?
Sure, of course.
I mean, the staring is obvious, right? If I'm just listening to it, I can non-define the sound and not decide what it is, but I don't know if I can experience it as a acid tripping sound. You know?
Well, in the terms you're talking about it, to make it analogous to staring at something visually, if you get a sound that's fairly constant, like for example the babbling of water
Okay.
on a brook or
So
something,
these
where
are
it's
constant.
well, you know, like you hear a bird chirping, it goes chirp. It's like, well, how do you stare at that? You know, it's like you have to be real fast. You have to You know, but if you have something, you know, or what, take a sink, and you know, you're talking about bathroom meditation. You're in the bathroom, start the water running a little bit, and you know, so or an air conditioner, white noises great.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I never played with that. So
Because I mean, staring is analogous to constancy. You know, if I go like that,
right,
then that's what you really look like. But if I go like that, then that's also what you look like. But the staring thing, I'm compositing all the difference that you are in the instant into a single thing, which is why it gets so trippy. Because the mind is trying to say, oh, I'm looking at the same thing, so it looks the same. But of course, experience says quite differently. Experience says,
yeah, I think sensation.
and sensation's the same way.
Well, I think we automatically average out.
Yeah.
The sensation because it's.
Yeah, the mind averages out. You know, it oversimplifies, goes to an abstraction, and leaves the concrete. You know, a good way to do it with touch is like rest your hand on a like you are on the arm of a chair without moving, and just feel what you're feeling.
Oh yeah, it's kind of electric and you pay enough attention.
Yeah, and that's not all. That's just opening the door. Yeah, but feel the chair under your butt or something like that. You know, I mean, just be with it sensitively to what it actually is, and you're gone.
Yeah, interesting. The other thing that's happening now is that like my eyes are really teary. And it just feels like it's like there is this grief of leaving behind the old sense of a me.
Well, it may be grief, but it may also be just a rich emotionality that's more than just grief. It may be more complex than that.
I mean, I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't really, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that's what I mean.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, you don't really need to pin it down anyway.
It is weird. It's like, oh, there's no cycle. Usually there's some kind of tears. I have some past experience that shows up, and that's where it's at.
Yeah.
Now it's like, yeah.
But emotion, unfoldment is very profound and powerful, and the experience it shows up on all the levels, and it shows up emotionally big time in a lot of different ways. So all sorts of emotionality, but again, it's not necessarily one thing or another. I mean, there may be elements, there may be sort of threads of that you could sort of find if you look for them. But if you just are open with what it is, you'll just feel the richness of it. And it will be sort of permeated and connected to all of it.
It's really interesting because I trace back even farther from Monday over the weekend, like, my dad's wife died and I was raising my father.
Yeah.
It showed up. It's like that was part of it too. It's just
sure. Sure. And all of that is just you being with the energy of your being.
Yeah.
And the emotionality of it is because there's an emotional dimension to your being.
I noticed with myself that when I felt that teariness feeling, wasn't really teariness, but it was that it was things I hung on to slipping away.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, for me, it wasn't some deep-seated past or or emotion even. It was just something I'd lived with all my life and it's just slipping away. And it seemed like a sense of loss, but it was actually led to celebration.
Yeah, like you say.
That's sort of what I was suspecting.
Yeah, it's like a grief of loss, but it's also a joy of wow, what a load off.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, yeah, really.
What is this? So I'll read you one more of these sutras and also part of the intro that seem to be talking about the same thing. It goes, when you have found the nature of mind, that is the root of the mind. When you have realized this nature, maintain it without delusion. This is perfect Buddha mind or meditation, the nature of Buddha. When you have found this state, seek neither to alter nor monitor it, doing nothing to it. Simply leave it as it is.
Right.
This is great perfection.
Right.
Since there is nothing which can be said to exist, there is no particular way to focus your mind on anything on which to meditate. Once you have realized this nature, simply remain there.
Right.
And then the intro also seems to say something about if one is unable to remain in the natural state at all times, then one must perform virtuous action, accumulate merits, and use
Right,
the
right.
methods needed.
Yeah, we've already talked about all that.
But what do they mean? What do they mean by remaining in this state? Like, do you find yourself in a state that you just always remained in, or?
I remain in radiant presence. I never leave it. As do you. And if you know you remain in radiant presence, then you're remaining in the state. You're always remaining in the state. Not remaining in the state is the fantasy that you aren't. It's like I was talking about with Irma, where, it's recognition. Recognition is always happening. Recognition is just the presence of actuality. Non-recognition is the fantasy that there's something else going on. And so not remaining in the state would be the fantasy that you're not in it. Oh, I've left it, I'm not in being anymore. Like,
Would you be clear though, that when you say state, you're not talking about who is that?
no. It's talking about the fundamental state, the natural state, or the natural condition. There's a Dzogchen technical term which they used in that phrase called the nature of mind, which means basically presence, radiant presence.
What's your experience of being in the state when you're in a calm mood?
Very familiar. Statistically speaking. I'm sorry to say.
But the calming mood's going on, but you're not.
Sure. Being in a calming mood in radiant presence is like being in a conversation in radiant presence. So here we are, we're in a conversation, but there's nothing here but this. Because the conversation is just an overlay, a way of defining what seems to be happening. But if I look closely at what's happening, all I find is this actuality with the infinite subtlety and complexity of implication of the qualities that are present, none of which can be pinned down precisely as to how they are. What exactly is a conversation? What exactly is a conversation? You can't answer that question. And yet, we're just in a conversation. Pretends you can. It pretends you're somehow limited or defined something. Whereas, if you look at what a conversation is, you can't find it. Conversations are the weirdest thing in the world. I mean, everything's the weirdest thing in the world. Conversations are too. So calming moods are certainly the weirdest thing in the world too.
You feel any, well, here's what happens to me. If I'm in a calming mood, then I have a certain awareness that I'm not identifying with it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little effort involved here to recall that this is what's true and to pull myself out of that a little bit so I don't just get totally shaken.
Sure.
You go through that effort? Or
yeah, I go through exactly the same thing.
You do, okay.
Sure. But to going through the effort is just a residue of habitual personality mechanism that is itself nothing other than radiant presence.
But there's still discomfort, okay, I don't want to feel this.
Sure, and that's more the same. Discomfort is radiant presence. Discomfort is equally one of the weirdest things there is. What exactly is discomfort? You know. Let's take a short break. I don't know if we have any actual desserts, but we can pretend we do.
Chocolate.
Oh, there's chocolate. Okay, vitamin C.
Some cheese.
And there's cheese, chocolate and cheese.
One of these days we'll strike the perfect balance
Lots of-
between main course and
Lots of
dessert.
You think so? You think so?
Peter, how's your mood now?
My mood right this morning. Yeah, I'll be doing positive to say.
Not from me though.
I don't know. I'm not okay. I'm wrong.
It's like, I just have to constantly try to make positions. Yeah, even if it's the most comfortable, it'll get uncomfortable. So like, it's a good one. I'm lucky if I stick to one position for like several hours. I went through a phase like in January when I wasn't sleeping for like 3 months. And then February, March, very nice. Starting last time. Weird. Yeah. But really, it's really interesting to see how it affects my overall maybe that's why such a huge the patience goes away. Everything seems uncomfortable. I get more annoyed by and I get and I finally look at the next one, I'm like, this seems right. Everything's chill. Like my entire experience. It's just basic. The body just needs to shut down. But it's practice, you know. Everyone says when you're preparing for when the baby's here. And this is a lot of control. Like you still have to function. You still have to wake up. You still have to.
No, you did.
Brush your teeth. I think I've been making myself go to work. I have to go to the office until Monday evening. Body completely said no. I was stressed, and then finally he said, you know, you're not going anywhere. Forget about work. Just work from home. Just do emails. And I'm like, you can't. Just expecting me, but then I knew that was like, I'm too far along at it. I felt a lot better. And then I even stayed home today. So it's fine. It's like finding that balance of like, if we're losing control of like, I need to continue my routine at work, like crushing at other people, like trusting me to, you know, meet my deadlines. It really is like, I think it was distressing her, like she was giving more, and I'm like, my priorities are right. And so, you know, it's like, I gotta take care of my body, and like, what am I doing? Why do I care about art so much? Yeah, but it doesn't go fast.
Are you getting an impression of what she's like?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I have like it's like a very subtle idea, like an intuition.
I would suggest that that's never going to change. That's who she is, and you're going to have that throughout her life. She's going to be that.
Oh, wow. She's calm overall, but if she's not getting what she needs, she's gonna show it.
Or she probably reacts to the stress.
Yeah. It was crazy. She was going bananas when I finally, I was like, going, like she was kicking me, like, jabbing me, which made it even worse, because I wasn't calm, and I wasn't breathing calmly and everything. So
that was hard on him.
yeah, and I realized I'm like, yeah, it's not all about what I want already. I need sleep, rest. I'm reaching new levels of exhaustion already. Just never feeling this tired physically and mentally. I think that like every new threshold, I'm also adapting to new levels of being challenged. Body is capable of so much. Like it's really pushing me off. Like yeah. So that's really interesting to see. Especially if I'm at home. The couch is right there. My bed's right there. At work, it's like nonstop. Something about being in that environment. Work for a tech company, middle of downtown San Francisco. I barred in for about an 30 months. I think I'm doing okay in it because I kind of just listen to music and meditate. But I think I'm feeling all of it. Because when I get home, I'm just right. Yeah.
When you relax, does she relax?
Yeah. And I find myself talking to her, like, if she really is, she usually kicks more at night, because I'm actually really at a stand, I don't move, and so I feel it. I'm like, hey, are you okay? Like, and it's almost like she wants me to shift. Like, maybe not here. And it shows down, like, just a couple hours away. Yeah, you gotta find the right spot. She's just like this right now.
There's a little bit of this.
Yeah, a little bit. It's just both sides. Bumpy. Yeah.
We saw this program last night. It was all about eggs.
About eggs?
And they showed it.
Birds' eggs.
These
Bird eggs.
birds sitting inside the it's so engineered to make use of such a small eggs with a lot of mass. So it's all folded in.
Like weird, I mean, I keep Googling images like how does a baby look in a womb at 30 weeks?
Oh, yeah.
And then like they don't need to lose juice or like at all. So it's really compact. And the feet's like this. Like the feet is that. Like, you don't feel it at all.
How
To make room.
So you're gonna go to a hospital? Which one?
The Long Creek, Kaiser. We did the whole hospital tour and everything. It was a 3-hour thing.
Is that where your doula's going to be?
Yeah, she's gonna meet us there.
She's gonna come
I still
over.
come over if we need her. Probably need her
Yeah.
to help me with early stage labor, just early stage active labor, and then the end is like the transitioning now. And the early stage is very long. Like this kind of waiting, contractions, but we're waiting for it to get closer and closer.
Are you having contractions on it?
They call it Braxton Hicks contractions. They're like little, they just like little cracks. So I was pinches here. Started already. They're like 3 chunks. But amazing, like hormones in the body will cause the contraction. All hormones. And then at a certain point, there's enough hormones for the entire uterus Do this. Yeah. Leave the baby on. I need to do anything.
That's right. The happen by itself.
Right, I need to stand
There's gonna
away.
come a time when you're gonna have to coach.
That's the only part that helps, right? And they urge not to do it until the very end to save my energy.
They'll tell you when to push.
So.
Squatting is the best.
The best and moving, yeah, if I'm having an unmedicated meditation, I'm not numb, I like, try to move like 20 minutes, I say, try a new position.
Yeah.
There's so many.
Yeah.
The doula's gonna help me with
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Yoga ball.
Oh,
We practice him holding me from behind, I'm sitting on, so like, I'm squatting and holding me.
How
That
about,
lasted 2 minutes.
how about being in the box? Have you taken box?
There's, yeah,
Are they good?
I haven't, yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
I don't have the energy to drive. I should take more back.
You should jump in the
Very
pool.
nice. I know. Water's very nice. I mean, so it gets like fresh to your body.
Gravity is horrific to the pregnant body.
Yeah.
Water takes away the gravity.
You have seen
Yeah,
it?
gravity.
Nice.
Oh, that'd be cool.
In this heat, that'd be
I know.
that'd be awesome.
It's not hot. It's 83 or 85 degrees.
I was like, perfect.
Is it part of your community thing? Nice. That's nice.
It's great.
You guys live in like a condo or a townhouse?
And you guys live in yeah.
Oh, what?
Doesn't do much, does it?
Sorry?
Doesn't do anything.
I've seen them. Some of them are like
Like,
on the market.
Yeah, do you have a whistle or something?
I
Yeah.
can, but it's loud.
Oh, that's the idea.
Some of them look beautiful. I can't believe it's like whole, like that.
Yes.
Well,
We don't have a whole lot of
much time
weekends
left.
left. Yeah.
This weekend or.
We are busy. Somebody's coming to help us with our car seat and that kind of stuff. But maybe next weekend.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go next weekend with your sister. Yeah. That'd be fun.
Welcome back. That was very considerate.
Just prank, you know.
wasn't their intention.
Okay, so when there's like when there's noticing, so like I've been focusing on my butt on the chair and foot against the floor and stuff, and so what tends to happen is there's like a subtle implication of the thing is such and such a way, right? But there's all these subtle,
Right.
Even like could say like subconscious sort of implications of
Sure.
of the thing being the way it is.
Right.
So that's So every sort of layer of that, or every new sort of implication, like you can notice it if you just like if you sort of sit on it, you just like pay attention to it, right? So like you just notice it, and it just sort of you get past one layer and you go to
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be good. Yeah. I mean, there's kind of tricks you can do. So you're trying to get to remember that you're dealing with the experience. What is the experience? So I might say, oh, I have my foot on the floor. I'm feeling my foot on the floor, and I can sort of ask myself, not verbally and not in words, but what exactly is present that I'm calling my foot on the floor? How do I know there's a foot on the floor? Something must be present that I'm calling a foot on the floor. So what is this that's present? And you undercut the interpretation to the experiential actuality, which is the basis for the interpretation. In other words, if there wasn't that sensation, there wouldn't be any foot in any floor. But the sensation, calling it a sensation is not even a sensation, it's what is it? And right there, you're going to the actual raw experience that you're calling or holding to be, whatever it is you're holding it to be. But yeah, so it can seem like sort of, peeling layers of an onion, getting to the fundamental actuality.
But it's not a doing.
No, it's not a doing.
It's not a doing. Your foot is on the floor, period.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
It's over. It is a done deal.
Well, we recognize the sensation is not really sensation, it's indescribable. That's unresolvability.
Yeah. That's as far as you can go.
That seems like it's so much easier in the field of touch, or whatever you call that field. In aesthetics than it is in the visual field.
Well, it may be, and again, I think there's a lot of probably personal inclination one way or another with people. I mean, I think humans are by and large very visually oriented creatures. And I think we put a large part of our attention on defining what's in our visual field as a way of orienting ourselves to the world we think we're in. So vision may be hard, but again, the easy way to do yoga is start where it's easy. So if it's easy for you to do it in touch, great. Do it in touch until you really get the relationship between what you're holding it to be and the actual presence.
Yeah, and that makes visual much easier.
Yeah, and exactly. So if you train where it's easy, and then where it's hard, it will get easier.
I mean, I pretty much got it down in the aesthetic world. It's
Yeah.
just like you can apply it to it, and it's interesting.
Yeah. Because the relationship is exactly the same. The relationship between the actual fundamental presence and whatever you're holding it to be is exactly the same relationship with the presence of what you think of as vision and what you're holding it to be.
Interesting.
The rule of thumb, do yoga where it's easy. And then it'll become easier where it's hard.
I kind of didn't realize I got to the point where I was so comfortable with that I didn't even realize it was yoga.
Yeah.
Or that it applied to
Yeah. Yoga is very simple. Yoga is just the actual presence, experience as it is.
But as I apply it to the visual field, the terror of disappearing is just like...
Yeah, interesting. But again, you can start, you don't need to confront that head on. You can start small, look at my pants and say, well, they look like black pants. And you say, well, what do I mean by black? And be with the presence that you're holding to be black. What is it? And just, it'll become very analogous to, you're not tackling Like, you're not trying to make the world disappear. You're just taking a tiny little snippet of something and being with
Yeah,
what
but
it
it
is.
is, it's like it's weirder than whatever it was already.
Well, either get used to it or back off. I guess.
How do you keep them down in the farm after their season?
That's right. That's right. Well, yoga can be provocative. It's I think for most people, there are stages of it where it's it's difficult, it's challenging, it's upsetting, or and provocative in various ways. I think for most people, it's not just all simple, smooth sailing the whole way. Yoga can involve all sorts of emotional turmoil and all sorts of other side effects or inclusions as unfoldment occurs. Because things get challenged and that can bring up other things, and I mean whatever
Yeah.
seeming complexity of the complexities of one's orientation as that begins to be ruffled, things can come out of the woodwork.
Isn't that because we're assuming it is something?
Yes, exactly right. But that's that's part and parcel of difficulty. And when you see that it's not something, then you don't need to do yoga anymore. It's coming to see that it's not something that can be provocative. You're essentially in yoga, you're transitioning from one way of orienting to your experience to another way of orienting to your experience. It's quite different. And so in that difference, it's maybe analogous. Well, no, it's a terrible analogy. It's different. The consensus reality way of orienting to experience and what experience actually is are radically and fundamentally different from each other. And so to have a smooth transition from orienting to it one way to another would be remarkable.
What would you say some of the symptoms are between the two?
What do you mean symptoms between the two? You mean what symptoms of what might occur as one shifts one's orientation? Any number of things. There can be emotional turmoil, there can be health issues, there can be behavioral issues, there can be karmic issues, random things that seem to show up objectively in your life. There can be all kinds of stuff.
Well, there's like the experience of being centered is not being centered.
Mm-hmm.
Is a distinctive difference in nature.
Well, everything about it is different. In talking about symptoms, I was talking more about phenomena that may seem to occur as one discovers these actualities. Side effects, you might say.
I was thinking more of experience, how experience differs.
Well, it differs fundamentally, and at the same time, paradoxically, it differs not at all.
Well, I was curious about how fundamentally. I mean, I think the sense of
there are no things, there is no space, there are no entities, there are no actions, there's no time, there's no space. I mean, so in a lot of very fundamental ways, it's quite different. Those things aren't negated; they just don't exist in the way that you may have thought they existed. And there's no them to not exist in the way that you thought they existed. And there's just this. This has no qualities and no parameters. In terms of interpretive frameworks, in terms of consensus reality orienting, there seems to be all sorts of qualities and all sorts of parameters.
Is it that the qualities disappear?
There seem to be not accurate qualifications.
I was looking at the notion of space, how there is no space, and what you must mean by that, especially in outer space.
Well,
I mean, it's
each one of your sense fields has a very different sense of space, just superficially. The mind has a completely different sense of space. If you look at what space does the mind happen in, what's the space that the mind feel like to the mind? I mean, there's no relationship virtually to this visual space or the space of sound. And the space of sound is very different from the space of vision. Space of touch is fundamentally different. I mean, what's the space that touch happens in? Life. You know, it's very peculiar. If you contrast that with what space does the visual field seem to happen in. In other words, if you had if for some reason all your senses shut down but your sense of touch, what shape would you think you were? What shape would you think your space was? Or sound, or thought? You know, so space is arbitrary. It's not nothing. You know, let's say the essence of space is the way this can seem to be differentiated. It's a way to sort of have this seem to be different than itself. You know, if all the colors appeared in exactly the same little dot, you wouldn't be able to have different colors.
What do you mean by the space of mind?
Well, exactly.
Or even what Naya?
Well,
you were like listing the senses, and then mind is one of them.
Yeah, if you qualify the mind as a sense.
That's where I'm stuck. I don't get it. That qualifying the mind is.
Well, it's arbitrary. Where does the mind happen? Where does thought happen?
Okay.
So what is the space from the perspective of thought, from the perspective of how thought happens, what's the space seem to be like? Just from it. Well, it's I don't know. It's weird. It's subtle. It's so. But again, the point isn't to try to pin down what these different things are, but the point is to show how different sense of spaces already exist within experience that are largely unacknowledged. You know, largely because we have a conceptual, imaginary three space, you know, of you know, there, you know, up, down, left, right, front, back, that we imagine extends indefinitely, and we think of all space as being like that. But experientially, that's not true.
Well, it seems like there's no space from just the standpoint of you either see something, everything you see appears all simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything you hear is, all of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I just didn't know what you meant by mind. I really didn't understand.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's just a way of putting it.
Yeah.
You know.
Still seems, because of some conceptual overlay I might be putting on it, it still seems that the thoughts and these sensations are all appearing in a consistent container. Like there's something.
What shape is that container?
This bubble that I'm in. Right, yeah.
What shape is the bubble?
Can't be said.
Yeah, and the shape the bubble seems to have, if you look at it, how different is that from the shape the bubble has if you just with your sense of touch? I mean, close your eyes and stop up your ears and just be with your sense of touch. What shape does that seem to be in or imply?
Yeah, no particular boundaries I can draw there.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. But it's a different kind of a weird than the weird of the visual field, for example, and so on. Or here's another way to look at it. When you're drifting off to sleep at night and you're almost asleep, what shape are you? What shape is it? Are you in then? And space disappears, but it's not gone. But it's not. It's just different.
Hey Peter, so like I do the sort of Vajrayana yoga, right? Or whatever, the subtle body yoga. And so if I'm doing yoga from your perspective, then it's like or I don't know, from the Vajrayana yoga perspective, supposedly like different parts have their different qualities, right? So if I do yoga from your perspective, then I could focus on one of those, and then I could sort of go through the layers, or I could find a sort of deviation from itself, right? The irresolvability.
Sure.
So if instead I sort of follow the whatever, if I don't want to play with that at the moment, and I just play with the Vajrayana yoga stuff, and I look at the different. So it's like that's a dreaming of a kind. It's like it's a lucid dreaming.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Or it's a sort of magic where I can take advantage of certain. Would you say like there's a certain like potentialities or something like that? It's like I can change my mood, or I can
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what magic is. Magic is navigating. It's moving within the spectrum of possible flavors of experience. Dynamically from one context to another context, but in whatever way that seems to be.
But it seems useful to at least be able to, or to play around with that a little bit, because it gives a certain possibility, or like more possibility of like switching from a common sense sort of point of view, right?
Sure.
So like
noticing that there are other perspectives that can be experienced is good training. But then going further than that, noticing the arbitrariness of these different perspectives, and then noticing the common denominator, that all of these perspectives are nothing other than experience, and all don't depart from experience, and all don't contain any qualities other than the qualities of experience. But still, in all, in itself, that's fine. That's good training. Because in terms of sort of bare basement, entering into yoga, the idea that there is any other possible ways of that experience can present itself is a big hurdle. Maybe the first hurdle. And so these kinds of practices are very useful for that, because you're virtualizing a very different sort of a experience or context. Yeah. And so you're training yourself that there are alternative experiential contexts available.
So, well, we've talked about that, like sort of vertical versus horizontal relating. Yeah, and so like the going around with like the subtle body yoga is a sort of vertical relation. Like I can say that's more true, or it's not necessarily. It's got less delusion.
Well, I wouldn't say less delusion. You know, anything that seems to be, that's held to be a certain way is full on delusion.
Okay.
So there's not, delusion doesn't have moreness or lessness.
But there seems like I've been.
It might be a less rigid or less stuck delusion.
Uh-huh.
A less, you might say a less concretized delusion in some way.
So I've been playing around most recently, like with heart space or spaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's like the front of the chest and the back and then the sides and whatever here and there, and it's like there's all these. I was even kind of thinking about that. Like, really, that I think that's like a heart chakra or something like that, right? But anyways, like there's one can move between those different spaces, and then there's a feeling of like a balancing in between like any pole, right? Which seems like that seems positive to me, and maybe not just for navigation.
In what way? Why do you say positive? What,
Well,
what about
I
it?
don't know,
No, what about it? Would you say is positive?
Well, so, like it's neither of the poles, right? So like if I sort of play around and feel into sort of center, like there's different poles that I can go to that seem to have their different separate qualities, or I can like be in a center that seems like it has all the qualities, or it has like just a neutral quality.
So you're training in being with ambiguity or with complexity, and not needing to collapse it down to one thing or another thing, right?
So Peter, when you speak of orientation, is it when you're going over that exercise of closing your eyes and just like feeling your fingers, is that like a change of orientation where it's just kind of experiencing
Orientation is what you hold it to be. Orientation is like your implicit description of what you're experiencing.
Like right now I'm orienting myself to be in a body right now, sitting on a couch.
Yeah, like, you may be.
Like I feel like the boundary of my body is like right here, and here's the boundary of your body here.
Right. Okay. So that's orientation. Yes.
Versus when I close my eyes and just listen to sound, and my body disappears, kind of. Mm-hmm. Is that like a different type of orientation?
In a way. In a way.
You were talking about like when you're right about to fall asleep. I really you see how it's like the way I orient to my experience completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So would you say is that kind of how it is to be? I know there's no like a goal to completely trying to kind of like disappear from.
See, when you change the orientation by manipulating it, like for example, close your eyes and feel your sense of touch, and all of a sudden you're in a different orientation. That's fine for showing you what orientations are. But the goal is to see that all orientations are arbitrary, to be able to sit with your eyes open and then see that there's no body, or see that there is a body, or see that there is anything. Because all of these orientations are imaginary, and they're arbitrary, and it's easy to move from one to another to another to another. So the problematic orientations are orientations which are held to be actually true objectively. So if I am my body, I am my body. Of course I'm my body. You know, it's like duh. See, I'm holding it objectively true that I'm my body.
You said just seeing how it's all arbitrary and
Yes.
not really predominantly like
Yes.
one way.
Yeah.
Which
So
work,
exploring, so doing things like closing your eyes can be an interesting exercise just to discover what orientations are and discover how different they can be from each other. But the trick is to discover that within any given orientation, like let's say visual field orientation, discover that the actual visual field does not have the orientation that you're used to holding it to have. Vision has no orientation. And so noticing that the orientation you have is being supplied by your imagination, unconsciously, and then is held to be true of the vision, even though it's not true of vision, it's just true of your idea of vision.
The idea, almost like a focus for me. Like I'm always focused on. It's an identification, right?
It's an interpretation, and it's identifying with the interpretation as being objectively true. Or you can say believing the interpretation to be objectively true.
And so yoga, in a way, it's almost just seeing other ways.
Yes, yoga is seeing, to someone who is, let's say, has very low spiritual unfoldment, they think that their direct experience and their interpretation of what they hold that to be in their imagination, they think that that's one and the same. They aren't aware that there's two different things going on. So yoga is training, first of all, in noticing that there's two different things. Noticing that there's direct experience, which is uninterpreted and uninterpretable, and then there's interpretations and beliefs which are held in imagination about the direct experience. Once you have separated those two things and noticed that they coexist as two different orientations, let's say, then you can study what direct experience actually is and learn about it, learn what it actually is, see what its qualities are. And then you can orient to those qualities rather than orienting to the actual qualities, rather than orienting to the imaginary stories that you're used to telling about it, which are not accurate. For example, you may think, "Oh, I exist in time. Time is this vast thing that stretches on from billions of years ago to billions of years in the future, and I'm sort of in it, embedded in it." Whereas if you look at experience, you discover there is no time. All there is now. Very, very different implication. It feels really, really different, but it's self-evident. I mean, it's not even subtle. It's just, can I experience anything other than now? Can I know that anything other than now exists? Can I know that the past exists? No, I can know that I have what I can call memories, which happen now, and claim to be about something that happened, but I can't know that they happened because all I can know is now. And the same with the future, and so on. So right away, if I look at that closely and see the truth of it, then all of a sudden I see that my idea of being in time is just a hypothesis. It's a story. It's not objectively true. The truth is there's just this instant, which exists very strangely.
And within that is instant.
Just as an example.
Yeah, that's a good example of timeline. And so in this instant, any orientation is arbitrary.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing. It's never one way.
Yeah. And if that is never one way, and the way that it is in any instant can't be pinned down. Not just because of change, but yes, because of change, but also and fundamentally because the qualities themselves do not resolve into sharpness. You can say everything is fuzzy.
But then would it paradoxically also imply a constant way of being? Like Like the fuzziness is the constant.
Yes, exactly. The fuzziness is the constant. So the constant is that there's no constant. But that's constant.
You're right, like it's a paradox.
Yeah, it's a paradox.
Okay.
Well, you're a numbers person, right? You're an accountant, right? So if you take like number line, you draw a graph, x, y axis, and you say, okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Now, every number falls on that line somewhere, but no number falls exactly on 1 or 2 or 3. They're just somewhere. So like, if you have an infinitely sharp pencil and you go to your axis and you put a dot on 1 and say that's 1, you go, no, it's not on 1, look closer. And you look closer and closer to that point and you miss by a little bit. And so you move it over so it seems to be right on it. And it's no, look closer. And you look closer, no, you missed a little bit. You will have always missed.
Definable.
It's never definable. And every experiential quality is analogous to that. No experience. So I say, this bottle is this shade of blue. What shade of blue? First of all, if it appears in my visual field, every single point of that is a different shade of blue. Subtly, but different. And secondly, exactly what shade of blue is that? You can't say.
So many, yeah.
But you can't say, not just theoretically, you actually can't say.
Yeah.
And all experiential qualities are actually like that. You can't get to the bottom of precisely what they are. They're fuzzy, they're irrational.
I think the issue, the reason it's easy to get caught in delusion is because there seems to be a real strong correlation between your orientation and the feedback you're getting from the environment. Like, for example, let's say, like, there's a friend of mine, he just had a breakup, right? And so I'm like, okay, let's examine what's true in this moment. Like, there's just discomfort in the body, in the chest, in the gut, and then this is really happening. And so, but seems to be some very strong correlation that if she comes back or if they get back together, these sensations will then disappear. And so,
but see, that's a generalization. The sensations, if she comes back, the sensations may change, but you can't say precisely what they'll change to. You can say, oh, generally they'll go away and they'll be better. But generally, to go away and be better is a very sloppy, generalized statement. Exactly what sensations you're having right now, and exactly what are they going to change to, and you can't say. And when they change, what exactly have they changed to? You won't be able to say. They are what they are, exactly, but you can't say what they are. So if you think in generalities, you can pretend to be precise. The more generalized you speak, the more precise you seem to be. But experience is not made of generalities, experience is made of specifics. You experience exactly what you're experiencing right now. You don't experience vague generalities. You don't experience a black shirt. You experience exactly this black, exactly the way it is right in this instant, and it's already something else.
I mean, it's challenging to tell others and even to myself sometimes that, like, like we were running late and I'm getting freaked out, and it's like, yeah, but I get that, there's a generalization that we'll be late and we'll miss some information and da. But it seems like there's a very strong correlation and feedback that says that if we hurry up and if we don't, we won't be late, and then I won't have to sit with these kind of sensations of like anxiety and but I get what you're saying, that that if you really examine what's happening, that it's just a product of overgeneralization, whatever.
Your description of it is a product of overgeneralization. The actuality that's happening is precisely what it is. And you can't say what it is in the instant, and you can't say what it's going to become. So you can generalize and say, oh, we're late. You know, if we don't hurry up, we'll be late, and then we'll miss something. You don't know that. You don't know that you're late. You don't know that you're going to miss something. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. You know.
It was like, what really happened? Like, we didn't miss one. It was a,
You were
it
early.
was it was another day. He's referring to a Kaiser class. We had to get to.
But you see,
We were so
the generalizations are fine. They're true as far as they go, but they don't describe reality. They don't describe actuality, because the actuality is your actual experience in the instant, which is so much inconceivably more rich and detailed and dynamic and undefinable than your generalizations are. It's like if someone asks you, well, what happened tonight? And you say, well, we went to the science house and had a talk. That's true. But does that actually capture what happened tonight? Every instant, every nuance of everything you experienced every instant of tonight? It's, you know, it's beyond laughable. You couldn't possibly say what happened tonight. You can't say what's happening right now in an instant. You can't think what's happening now. And just notice that, the truth of that fact. So the only way to say it is to create a fiction, a simpler version of it, where you can say, oh yeah, we're sitting there and we're chatting. Okay, cool, yes, that's not untrue. But does that comprehensively describe and capture everything that's happening right here, right now? You know? It's just a reality check of what are you really experiencing? What is your experience actually? And how is it that? And if you look, descriptions are a whole nother universe from your experience. I mean, you know, just you know, I mean, it's just so obvious. I can say, well, you're a person sitting on a sofa, and you're a person sitting on a sofa, so it's the same. When I say, your person sitting on a sofa is exactly the same as your person sitting on the sofa. It's absurd. You're not. There's nothing the same about you. But the description makes it sound as if it's the same by oversimplifying it to the point where it's not untrue, but it doesn't capture the specifics of what's actually present.
Why does it feel like there's so much effort to just actually take a moment to see what's present versus just doing the overall generalization of like, oh.
Because you're going against the stream. You're going against what you've spent your entire life training to do.
Is your experience where it's easier? Does it?
Yeah, much easier. It's so much easier. The greatest ease is to just let things be what they are. You don't have to do anything.
With the arbitrariness of perspective, it seems like the primary delusion is thinking that there's another perspective with which this could be compared to.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's the primary delusion, but it's certainly it's a biggie, sure.
On the other hand, thinking that
because a perspective or an orientation is itself undefined, even though it may pretend to be defined. So I may hold a perspective on something, but if I look at the perspective that I hold on something, I don't really know what it is because I can't say what it is. Because I don't really know what it is. I only know what it is because I'm oversimplifying and I think it's what I think it is, which of course is what it actually is. So I didn't mean to take it somewhere.
No, it's good.
thinking that there's any other perspective is delusion. Not thinking that there's any other perspective is delusion.
Yeah, and thinking that there is a perspective, let alone other, is already delusion. Because again, the perspective is itself undefinable, so it's not actually a perspective. It pretends to be a defective perspective by pretending to be definable.
Would you say that thinking is delusional?
Yeah, conceptual thought is delusional, absolutely. Because actuality is inconceivable, and concepts are predicated on the notion that that's not true. Concepts are predicated on the notion that actuality can be conceived of. I can say, I'm thinking of this, and the concept pretends that there's really an of this, but there's no of. There's thinking, and there's this, and they have absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Imagination and interpretation seem to have quite a different quality.
Well, interpretation is imagination that pretends to be about something. Whereas imagination is interpretation that isn't necessarily about anything. So I can imagine myself on a mythical mountain, jumping off the summit straight up forever into space, and I'm not thinking that there really is such a mountain and it's really happening, but I can imagine it. So that's not an interpretation, that's an imagination. But I can also imagine that this is a blue container that I bought at the store that I'm holding in my hand. That is an interpretation, but it's actually imagination.
That's where air becomes earth.
Yes.
Well, that's why we can't say if there's any continuity. Even though there is only just this moment, paradoxically, the moment changes.
Yeah, and we can't say what changes means either.
And if there is a continuity of something,
it can't be found, because also you can't find any continuity, so you can't find what continuity is. Continuity is a sort of a fantasy.
and yet
The quality itself is a fantasy.
There does seem to be a persistence of something.
Seems to be, yeah.
Along with all the change. Maybe that changes.
Well, there's something, the change isn't along with what is, that what is looks like change, and it also looks like not change. You know, that's why I call it radiant presence, because it implies this polarity. The presence is the not change, and the radiance is the change, but there's actually not two things. It's not radiance and presence, it's radiant presence. So, you know, it looks like change, but it doesn't change. It looks like it doesn't change, but it changes. You know, try and figure that out.
Well, actually, it's quite easy to figure that out. If you don't make any assumption about change.
Yeah.
Time.
What's this thing about the Shakti pot, like getting transmission from a guru, and is there any sort of and anything to it, like the initiations and the Shaktipots, like the Buddhist monks and all that?
Shaktipat is an interpretation. All that there is radiant presence. So if there was Shaktipat, it would be radiant presence.
But is there some kind of transmission that like can somebody put you in the enlightened state through transmission?
It's a mystery. You know, when enlightenment happens, you can't say how it happens. So you can't say whether or not anyone put you in it. You can't prove they didn't, but you can't prove they did. And since you can't prove that they even exist or that they're them, you know, it's sort of a big point.
Well, what about like Kundalini awakening?
It's all the same.
Yeah.
It's just, again, it's just different ways of describing and interpreting something that's uninterpretable, so why bother? You know, in terms of Shaktipat and all that, you can't say what happens in spiritual engagement, but you can't say what happens in anything, anytime, so it's no surprise.
That you can put ingredients together in a recipe. And who knows what happens, but.
Right, who knows what happens?
But if you put these ingredients together.
You put the ingredients together and something happens.
You get a delicious stew.
Or a pile of mud.
Yeah. So what are like when people like Amma are giving hugs and like other some of these avatars are doing their like Shaktipat or whatever, like what's going on there?
Well, you can't say what's going on in the first place. But in the second place, it often involves situations and schemes to separate people from their money. Well, it's about quitting time, so.